gentlemen, Bill Falloon, thank you for that inspirational message. I appreciate all that you've had to say. And, you know, to key in on what he had to say about Bugsy Siegel in Christmas Day way back when, now he was clearly a visionary. He certainly saw that Las Vegas at some point in time was going to be what it was. But I think that, Bill, I think that you also are going to be leading us in a great quest here in ending aging and defeating death. Can you remember what life was like when you were a child? Are you like me around the holidays, reminiscing on things when you were young, throwing snowballs and making snow angels and writing letters to Santa and leaving him milk and cookies at night, on Christmas Eve tonight, anticipating what's going to happen on Christmas morning? Then Santa would come on Christmas Eve, and in the morning you'd open your presents that were nicely signed by jolly old Saint Nick. Then as you matured, somehow you found out that it was a fantasy, and you had been misled into believing in something that did not actually exist. Then as an older and more mature thinker, maybe you attended a church or a temple and wondered if there were other lies or deceits. Perhaps you wondered what else in life was a fantasy. Perhaps you began to question the commonly held belief in a life after death. Perhaps you wondered, what if there was no afterlife? That death was the end. No heaven, no Zion, no nirvana, no paradise, just the end of your life. Perhaps you realized that in 500 years or 300 years or 200 years, all of the things that you have done, all of your accomplishments, your life, all of this would be for naught, that it would be all forgotten. Our mission here at the Church of Perpetual Life is to end aging and defeat death. Tonight we shall remember all of the approximately 220 patients currently in cryopreservation. We shall hold a light for these men and women and children until we shall all meet again in a brighter future. We shall now remember the resurrectables. I'd like to invite you, if you're interested in doing so and you feel comfortable doing that, to come forward and light a candle for those who are in cryostasis. And if you're comfortable speaking on the microphone, the names, we're going to get to that point as well. There are short biographies of the 70 resurrectables that have made their cryopreservation suspensions public. At any time during this process, you could also come forward and light a candle for those that have passed. Maybe they're not in cryostasis, and if you'd like to say a silent prayer, you're welcome to do so as well. Or to say a prayer for a cryonaut who is the cryonaut of the future. The first cryonaut was Dr. James Bedford, and Adam's going to bring that up now. Dr. James Bedford is the first person frozen under controlled conditions for possible later revival. Dr. Bedford was a serious man of pleasant disposition who made many friends. In 1966, the 73-year-old retired professor became the first cryonaut, the first person to make advanced arrangements for cryopreservation, which was carried out the following January by the Cryonic Society of California. After years of private storage by relatives, he was transferred to TransTime in the 1970s, and now is at Alcor. Don't be afraid to wear overalls, the practical-minded psychology professor would tell his students. Dr. Jim knew many honors, wrote books on vocational guidance, taught for years in California schools, and undertook several wilderness expeditions. Chase, would you like to come? Chihiro Asoimu, Margaret Bradshaw,
Joseph G. Cannon and Teresa M. Cannon. Born in Wisconsin in 1915, Joseph George Cannon studied engineering in college and became a licensed consulting engineer in the early 1940s. Around mid-1945, he married Teresa Terry Mackey, who would be his wife for many years. Terry was born in Michigan in 1916 and was an elementary school speech correctionist by profession. Joe boasted that in 39 years of marriage, they never had an argument, though they did have disagreements. The Cannons purchased property in Florida and started spending their winters there. Returning to their home in Wisconsin for the warmer months, Joe and Terry had a long-time interest in cryonics, which culminated in their cryopreservations at Alcor as an unusual married couple who both have exercised that option, Joseph G. Cannon and Teresa M. Cannon. Fred Chamberlain II. Fred Jr. was the father of Fred Chamberlain III, who with his wife Linda founded Alcor in 1972. Born in Berkeley, California in 1897, he soon moved to Plainfield, New Jersey. He entered Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island in 1914, but left during World War I to enlist in the U.S. Army. He married Elizabeth Morrock in 1928. For a number of years, Fred Jr. renovated and operated a farm in Keswick, Virginia, and lived at several residences in that state. In 1968, he lost his wife to a sudden coronary, I would think, condition and moved to California. Among his many talents, Fred wrote inspiring poetry and loved to play the guitar and keyboard. An accomplished engineer, he was the first to standardize a scientific cryopreservation protocol, built the first perfusion equipment himself, and put it all into a manual so others could duplicate this work. He was a pioneer in involving cryonics out of the mortuary. Fred is still a part of all of us in TerraSem collective consciousness, and we will continue to enjoy his warm creativity again soon. Lyubov Chernaya. Lyubov was a therapist and a loving mother of Valery Udilov, the director of CryoRes. John Knoll. John Knoll was a member of the Cryonics Institute since 1991. John was at one time the contracts officer, the CI, the person who verifies that members' contracts are completed. John worked in the aerospace industry before he retired. Dr. Eugene T. Donovan. Gene was a psychiatrist. He had always wished for immortality, but believed that science and medicine would someday provide for it, but he also believed that it would never be within his personal reach until he found out about cryonics. Cindy Donovan said Gene was dying, Gene wanted to be suspended, and Gene needed to die with what he called a dream in his pocket. So he decided the night to do everything possible to make that dream come true. Wesley Ducharme and Viola Rose Dufault. Viola is the grandmother of CI member Kevin Boyle. She appeared on television interviews with Kevin in response to journalists' interests in Kevin's dog, Thor's cryopreservation, and became a CI member herself. She attended the 2006 annual general meeting at the Cryonics Institute with her grandson Kevin, where she was thrilled to meet and have several friendly conversations with Robert Ettinger throughout the weekend. Viola Rose Dufault was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts on January 9, 1919. During most of her working career, she was an office manager for various Boston area companies. Viola was a very outgoing person. She enjoyed traveling and made friends easily. She was also a voracious reader. Dr. John Erfurt. Elaine Ettinger, Robert Ettinger's first wife. May Ettinger, Robert Ettinger's second wife. Ray Ettinger is the loving mother of Robert Ettinger. Robert Chester Wilson Ettinger. Robert was an American academic known as the father of cryonics because of the impact of his 1962 book, The Prospect of Immortality. The book said that future technological advances could be used to bring people back to life. He is considered by some a pioneer transhumanist on the basis of his 1972 book, Man and Superman. Ettinger founded Cryonics Institute and the related Immortalist Society. Ettinger became an overnight media celebrity with many published articles and television appearances and radio programs in which he promoted the idea of human cryopreservation. Since the commercial publication of The Prospect of Immortality, all those active in cryonics today can trace their involvement directly or indirectly to the publication of one or both of Ettinger's books. Lydia Fedorenko. Lydia was a teacher of mathematics in St. Petersburg, Russia. She loved life. There were her friends, family, and of course all the former math students she had taught over the decades. She wanted to extend her life by another 200 to 300 years. Her son Danily Fedorenko said her last wish was eventual resurrection. FM 2030, Feridian M.S. Fenderi. Prominent futurist, author, and longtime cryonicist, FM 2030 became an Alcor patient in July 2000. In the 1960s, he gained prominence for 3 novels, The Day of Sacrifice, The Beggar, and Identity Card. In the 1970s, he started a popular series of books about the future, which came to include Optimism 1, Upwingers, Telespheres, Are You a Transhuman, and finally Countdown to Immortality. He changed his name to FM 2030, hoping to remain active to the year he would celebrate his 100th birthday. He had a strongly positive view of life and in the future. In the introduction of Upwingers, he summarizes this feeling. My regret is that I am not optimistic enough. It is not possible to project the fantastic worlds which will continue to open up to us in the coming years. Worlds which would far transcend my most daring optimism. Dr. Andrea Foote, Elmer Fredrickson, Arlene Frances Fry. From Her Blue Eyes Will Sparkle by Linda Chamberlain, Arlene's blue eyes sparkled as she told the hospice nurse, I feel wonderful. Her voice was weak, it trembled as she continued. My mother was quite a character, a great role model in many ways, and a woman who became a strong cryonics convert in the last few months of her life. We made a promise long ago to meet again in the future at the most elegant lounge on the moons of Saturn, overlooking the rings and to toast the old days, the struggle to survive. It will become a centennial event, meeting to share travelers' tales and being there together. I know Arlene's blue eyes will sparkle as we toast to success and to being together again. Michael Louis Friedman. Michael was an Alcor suspension member since 1987. An attorney, Michael was gunned down in Los Angeles Law Library, slain by a disgruntled client he hardly knew. The client's 62-year-old James Sinclair had a grudge against the police for alleged misconduct, and also a history of mental problems. The 38-year-old Freeman had agreed to take his case when another attorney dropped it after being threatened. Still trying to familiarize himself and photocopying some documents, Freeman was shot, unfortunately. Michael Louis Friedman was an Alcor suspension member since 1987. James Gallagher. Jim was a software developer from Sunset Beach, California. Jim was a libertarian. He felt that the concept of government was inherently flawed. As he put it, since there will always be people that cheat, steal, pillage, maim, and murder, we are told society requires institutions that cheat, steal, pillage, maim, and murder to protect us from those people. A self-described Air Force brat, Jim served an enlistment of 3 years in the U.S. Army and got out in 1962 before he could be sent to Vietnam. He lived in Nicaragua and later the Bahamas before returning to California. He was CryoCare's first patient to be suspended. Paul Garfield and Jim Glennie. As time passed, the idea of cryonics began to appeal to Jim. He had always had faith in science and wanted to see the future and experience the rewards it could bring. When he discovered he had a life-threatening illness, he had no further doubts. He completed the necessary paperwork and became an Alcor member. Jim lived in Colorado, where he was a hydrogeologist. He specialized in mapping groundwater. Jim and his remarkable wife, Mary Margaret Karen Iden, had chosen to fight Jim's illness with every possible resource. In the event there was only one choice left, to cryopreserve himself in the hope that he would be revived in the future when his illness could be cured. Gregory Grabsky, Hugh Hart, David Hayes. David was one of the original founders of Suspended Animation Incorporated and was a longtime member of Alcor. Due to David's youthful age of 46, his clinical death was referred to Palm Beach County's medical examiner's office. Though legal counsel, Alcor was successful in negotiating with the courts to allow for a virtual autopsy to be performed in place of a typical, more invasive procedure. After a CT scan was performed and the medical examiner was satisfied with the results, they agreed to release the body to Suspended Animation, who was working on Alcor's behalf. Curtis Henderson. Curtis graduated from Pennsylvania Military College and Temple University Law School. He passed the New York bar exam. He was a co-founder of the Cryonics Society of New York, CSNY, along with Saul Kent, James Sutton, and a designer named Carl Werner. At the organizational meeting, Carl Werner coined the word cryonics. Curtis soon became the president. Curtis and Saul Kent spent October 1966 touring the United States to assist in consolidation of the nascent cryonics movement. On October 2nd, they attended a meeting in Oak Park, Michigan, which led to the formation of the Cryonics Society of Michigan, with Robert Ettinger as president. On October 14th, they attended a meeting in Woodland Hills, California, where it was agreed to incorporate the Cryonics Society of California, with Robert Nelson as president. The following January, CSC cryopreserved the first person, Dr. James Bedford. James Horahan, Richard Clare Jones, Richard Clare Jones was born in San Francisco in 1931. He served in the military for 2 years, 1955 through 1957, and by the early 60s was active in his chosen profession, entertainment. Using the stage name Dick Clare, he and his partner Jenna McMahon performed dozens of husband and wife comedy skits on The Ed Sullivan Show and other television programs. But his greatest success was in writing scripts and producing shows. The comedy team of Clare and McMahon won 3 Emmys for The Carol Burnett Show and created the TV sitcoms Facts of Life, It's a Living, Mama's Family, and Flow. Jones' involvement in cryonics started early, around 1965, when he read The Prospect of Immortality by Robert Ettinger. Dick Jones, who became an AIDS patient, was cryopreserved by Alcor in 1988. Larissa Karpuk and Dora Kent. The mother of longtime cryonics activist and supporter Saul Kent, Dora Kent was born in Poland in 1904, of a Jewish background, and immigrated to the United States in 1922, along with her parents. Samuel and Sarah Lev Rothport and an older sister, Molly, Dora's husband, William Kent, died in 1940 when Saul, their only child, was less than 1 year old. So Saul had no memory of his father, and his mother did not remarry. Saul remembers this: "My mother was both a mother to me and a father to me. She was very devoted to me. She brought me up by herself. She stayed in the house and worked as a dressmaker at home. It wasn't until I was about 14 or 15 that she went out and got a job. My mother really believed in being independent and having as much freedom as possible, and I learned a lot of the way I am today from my mother." Lyudmila Kiselov, loving mother of Margaret Kiseleva. Sergei Kucherenko. Sergei was a worker in Kirovograd, Ukraine. Edward W. Kurt. And Jerry D. Leaf. Jerry D. Leaf was born in Artesia, California, close to Los Angeles, and spent much of his life in that vicinity. Jerry's wartime experience helped to orient him towards an unusual career in trying to extend human life. In 1966, he heard a lecture on cryonics and was intrigued, and started corresponding with cryonics groups. In time, he would become an instructor in thoracic surgery, co-author of over 25 papers from the UCLA laboratory, and set up a program for the cryogenic storage of heart valves and arteries for transplantation into children. Meanwhile, he became active in cryonics and would direct some landmark experiments at Alcor in the 1980s to demonstrate recovery of function after initial stages of cryopreservation using animal models. A heart attack led to his cryopreservation in Alcor in 1991. Cryonics benefited greatly while he was active, achieving a new level of technical sophistication and respect. Alexei Lonsev, Dr. Richard March, John Montz, Dr. Thomas Munson, Darius Nelson, and William O'Rice. Bill legally changed his name in 2002 to William Constitution O'Rice, Bill O'Rice, name of course, Billy Joe Bonsall. He described himself as an extreme libertarian, joined the Constitution in 2000, and completed his CI paperwork in July 2008. Bill was a lifetime member of the Immortality Institute, IMINST, which he joined in August 2002. He made nearly 10,000 postings to IMINST forums, and Ben Best said, "I respected his intelligence and his determined fight against death. Bill is a man who relentlessly questions and distrusts authority. Thinking for himself, he clung to life with every fiber of his being." Stanislaw Penska, Stanley, or Stash, as his parents called him, was born on April 13, 1896. His parents came to the United States in 1890, hailing from Novi Targ, Poland. Contracting was Stanley's most enduring profession, continuing for about 40 years, but there were others along the way. It's hard to tell what drew Stanley to cryonics, but it also sparked a great interest. He received Cryonics magazine for many years before deciding to go further. But then he signed up so quickly and wanted to know what else he could do. Many newspaper clippings detail his donations to various local civic organizations, including the hospital and the fire department. Henrietta Popper, William Reeves, Orville Richardson, Anita Riskin, Mary Robbins, Dennis Ross, Walter Runkle, Valentina Simkini. Valentina was a loving mother. She worked as a civil servant in Moscow, Russia. Nadeska Senakova, Rocco Roy, Miss Costa's brother Rocco Roy Savella. He experienced cardiac arrest approximately 40 hours afterward without ever regaining consciousness. Prior to his operation, Roy had secured a promise from his family that if he did not survive the operation, he should be placed into cryonic suspension. According to Mrs. Costa, Roy had often talked about cryonics and had always said he wanted to be frozen whenever discussions about death or methods of disposition came up in conversation. Paul E. Siegel. Paul Siegel was an early cryonics activist in the New York City area, doing volunteer work with Curtis Henderson for the Cryonics Society of New York in the 1960s while pursuing a career in the biological sciences. In 1971, he relocated to the University of California, Berkeley, to complete his doctoral dissertation under the noted aging researcher Paola Tamiris. Paul also became active in the Bay Area cryonics organization TransTime, where he directed a well-publicized series of experiments with hamsters to demonstrate recovery of function in mammals after cardiac arrest and partial freezing. He gained further publicity with Siegel's dog, Miles, who was cooled to the near ice point and then revived. In 1990, Siegel and associates formed the biotech company Biotime. Paul Siegel deanimated in 2003, was cryopreserved at TransTime. Rose Selkovich, Sylvia Sinclair, James H. Stevenson. Jim Stevenson, PhD, worked for NASA for 35 years in the Human Systems Integration Division. Jim was blind, a libertarian, and a longtime advocate of cryonics. A few years ago, he had this to say about his work. I am an experimental psychologist. I am also blind. My work has applications for sighted as well as blind people. It involved representing mathematics, graphs, statistics, statistical structures, and what we call stochastic processes and Markov's chains in multiple variables in each of those and representing them as sound. So they are tone-encoded sonic representations of complex data structures. Kim Swoosie. Kim was a 19-year-old sophomore studying psychology at Truman State College in Kirksville, Missouri, when she took a cognitive science course. There she read Kurzweil's The Age of Spiritual Machines. She really liked it, found it very compelling, and she became interested in transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and cryonics, though like many young healthy people, she didn't focus much on her own mortality. 2 years later, she suddenly started having odd headaches. A checkup produced a grim diagnosis. She had glioblastoma multiforme, an aggressive form of brain cancer with a poor cure rate. Her funds were very limited, and she turned to the internet. Her case was widely publicized, and donations were collected through the Society for Venturism. With that and other sources of funding, she was cryopreserved at Alcor in January of this year. Peter Toma. Dr. Peter Toma was born in Dobez, Hungary in 1924. Peter immigrated to the United States in 1952. His first professional job was in 1954 at the California Institute of Technology's physics lab in Pasadena. Since Peter spoke several languages, the inspiration came to him to use new computer technology for translation. Eventually, Peter's machine language translation programs developed into a suite of software called Systran. Systran has performed extensive work for many government agencies and countless universities and Fortune 500 companies. The advent of the internet led Alta Vista and eventually Yahoo to use this software to run the web-based application known as Babelfish. It allowed for instant cross-platform language translation. Yuliva Verdelets. Yuliva was born on April 6, 1990 in Shishaki, Poltava region, Ukraine. She spent her senior year studying at Williston High School, Florida, in the United States, winning the Future Leaders Exchange Program. Afterwards, she went to study Prague in the Czech Republic, where she received her bachelor's degree in international business in the Faculty of International Relations of the University of Economics in Prague. She was fluent in English, Ukrainian, Russian, German, Spanish, Czech, and she also studied French. She sang well and played the piano since she was 6 years old. Her hobbies were sports, dancing, and photography. Her life motto was never, never, never give up, and you will make a difference. Olga Vasheva. Olga was the wife of the famous blind Russian photographer, immortalist Igor Vladimirovich Vishev. They lived in Chelyabinsk, Russia. The Vishevs signed cryopreservation contracts after scrupulous research of the whole field. Jerry White, Eleanor Williams, Patricia Luna Wilson. Patricia Luna Wilson, better known as Luna Wilson, was the daughter of immortalist writer and organizer Robert Anton Wilson. Luna was a pacifist, a vegetarian, and a lover of people and animals. On October 2nd, 1976, While working at the clothing store, she was beaten to death in an apparent robbery. Her brain was cryopreserved by the Bay Area Cryonics Society, later the American Cryonics Society. Kira Yurosova. Kira was the grandmother of Danila Andreevich Medvedev, the chairman of the board of directors of Cryoros. Jackson Jack Zinn. Jack was a California lawyer with a long history of Cryonics membership. Jack has had Cryonics arrangements with the American Cryonics Society, of which he was once president. TransTime, Alcor, and most recently CI. He even tried to start his own cryonics organization, the International Cryonics Foundation. Leonard Zubkov. At the time of his untimely demise in cryopreservation in 2002, the 44-year-old Leonardo Zubkov lived in Crystal Bay, Nevada. World-renowned for his expertise in computer architecture and operating systems, he was also an entrepreneur who had become very wealthy. He trained to be a helicopter pilot and was close to receiving his license. On August 29th, he was flying over a lake with an experienced instructor in the Misty Fjords National Monument Wilderness near Ketchikan, Alaska. For reasons unknown, the copter took a flip dive into the cold water, landing upside down. The two aboard were casualties, most likely by drowning. His cryopreservation was brain only after a mandatory autopsy in Anchorage before his remains were released by the medical examiner and transported to Alport in Arizona.
Thank you, Chase. He did that all completely unrehearsed. He didn't know I was going to call upon him just now, and I appreciate you doing that, Chase. That was wonderful and very touching. There are approximately 150 other cryonauts in preservation. Bill, I'd like to ask you to come forward, if you wouldn't mind, lighting the lavender candle, the purple candle, to represent all of these 150 or so souls tonight. So we're remembering them, and so we will light this candle in memory and remembrance of the 150 resurrectables who do not wish to have their names be made public for whatever their personal reasons may be. And with the lighting of this candle, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Do you have any last words?
Yeah.
And Bill?
It's been a very interesting night. We have a lot of food downstairs, so I hope everyone is hungry. We advocate calorie restriction, but the quantity of food we have might make you want to make an exception this time. And so I'm going to be around for a couple hours to converse with individuals, and we just are looking forward to this church getting up off the ground and determining what people really want to do as far as the dates of attendance and the subjects that we're going to talk about. Though our annual remembrance of the resurrectables, we're going to have that. I feel that people who are in cryopreservation, they have an opportunity of revival. A tremendous amount of time and effort went into their arrangements and their cryopreservation, and so often they're kind of forgotten because life goes on. We all have other things to do. So at least once a year, we at least like to mention their names. And by the way, some of those names up there that were just kind of glossed over, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit more about them, because some of those people were real heroes. They made a big difference. But of course, we don't really have the time to go over every single biography. But we'll make sure next year we do that. So thank you, and I will look forward to having dinner with everyone downstairs.
And you know, while we have a lower turnout at this particular first Christmas Eve than we had hoped for, I do know that there are a lot of people who are live streaming and watching tonight, and certainly many more to come as well. So I want to thank all of those people around the world, in Moscow, in Hatay, in near Beijing, and all around the world, who have come visited us this evening through the magic of the internet. We get a traditional kosher turkey and brisket feast downstairs. So we have lots of wonderful times yet to have downstairs. Lots of things to talk about. Good food to eat. Certainly plenty of drinks.